Mary Catherine's frozen fingers couldn't find the door handle. Blood from her split lip had crystallized on her chin, and the baby kicked hard enough to make her gasp as she collapsed against the adobe wall. Through the howling wind, she heard boots crunching through snow behind her. Gallagher's men still coming. "Please," she whispered to the weathered door. "Somebody be home?" The door swung open before she could knock. A woman with steel-gray hair and surgeon's hands pulled her inside without questions, eyes already assessing the torn dress, the bruised face, the desperate curve of 8 months pregnant. "How many are following you?" Elena Vasquez asked, reaching for the rifle prop beside the door. "2, maybe 3, Mary Catherine's teeth chattered. "They want the baby." Elena peered through the window's gap. Dark shapes moved through the storm, but the wind made it impossible to count. She bolted the door and guided Mary Catherine to the chair beside the stove. "You picked a hell of a night to run." "Didn't pick it. They came tonight to take me to the judge. Said waiting for spring was too risky." Elena's hand stilled on the blanket she was wrapping around Mary Catherine's shoulders. "What Judge Blackwood?" "Territorial." The sound of breaking glass cut through the wind, not from outside, from the back of the clinic. Elena grabbed her rifle and motioned for Mary Catherine to stay low. She crept toward the rear window, stepping carefully around the shattered remains of her medicine bottles. A figure crouched in the snow outside the broken window. Not Gallagher's men, a woman dark-skinned, wrapped in buffalo hide, blood on her hands from climbing through the glass. She held her belly protectively with one arm, while the other pressed against the wall for support. "Friend or enemy?" Elena called softly. "Desperate?" the woman replied in careful English. "My name is Singing Bird. Men on horses drove me here. Same men, I think, that follow the red-haired one." Elena lowered the rifle slightly. "You're bleeding." "Not mine. The glass cut deep, but I've had worse." Singing Bird's eyes fixed on Mary Catherine. "You mentioned Judge Blackwood. He the one buying babies." Elena helped her through the window, noting the professional way she'd wrapped her hands to minimize damage. "You know him. My people sold me to him 6 months ago when the hunger got bad and they needed his money for winter supplies." Singing Bird's voice carried no self-pity, just cold fact. "I escaped 3 days ago." The front door rattled under heavy fists. A man's voice, thick with Irish accent but American arrogance. "Open up, territorial business." Elena motioned both women toward the corner behind her medical cabinet. She called through the door, "Clinics closed, come back when the storm breaks." "Dadrenon, Iraranite. We're looking for a runaway Irish girl, red hair, carrying stolen property." Mary Catherine's face flushed angry red. "Stolen property," she spat. "Open this door or we'll break it down." Another voice joined the first, younger, meaner. "Judge's orders. Assassin." Elena checked her rifle's load. 2 bullets, at least 2 men outside, maybe more. She looked at the women huddled behind her cabinet, one Irish, one native, both carrying babies that powerful men wanted to claim. The pattern was becoming clear. "There's a third woman," Singing Bird whispered suddenly. "I saw her on the trail. Young Mexican, maybe. 3 men chasing her, different from ours, but heading this way." As if summoned by her words, desperate knocking came from the clinic's side door. A voice called in Spanish, "Por favor, ayúdame." Elena cursed under her breath. 3 pregnant women, multiple sets of pursuers, and a storm that would kill anyone caught outside. She made her decision. "Can either of you shoot?" she asked. Mary Catherine shook her head. Singing Bird held out her hand. "Give me the rifle. I've killed men before." Elena handed over the weapon and grabbed a scalpel from her kit. She opened the side door fast, pulling a young Mexican girl inside before slamming it shut again. The girl's silk dress was shredded, her face bruised, but her eyes burned with fury rather than fear. "I am Dolores Mondragon," she said, breathing hard, "and I will cut the throat of any man who tries to drag me back to that monster." "What monster?" Elena asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. "Judge Blackwood. He bought me from my father to breed children for his special clients. Rich men who want babies but can't have them legally." Dolores's hand moved to the knife handle protruding from her torn dress. "I left 3 of his men in the arroyo. They won't be following anyone." The pounding on the front door intensified. "Last warning, open up or we come in shooting." Elena looked at her 3 unexpected patients. All pregnant, all running from Judge Blackwood's network, all arriving at her clinic on the same night. The coincidence felt less like chance and more like trap. "How did you all know to come here?" she asked. Mary Catherine frowned. "The priest in Hillsborough said you were discreet about difficult births." A traitor told me, Singing Bird said. Said you helped women with nowhere else to go. My father mentioned you, Dolores added, before he sold me. Said you worked with territorial officials on special cases. Elena's blood turned to ice water. Special cases, discreet births, working with territorial officials. The words Judge Blackwood had used in his letter 6 months ago, the one she'd thought she'd burned. She walked to her medical cabinet and pulled out the leather journal, flipping to the page where she'd hidden the letter. But the page was empty. The letter was gone. Ladies, she said, her voice steady despite the terror building in her chest. I think we've been played. The front door exploded inward with a crash of splintered wood. 2 men stepped through, guns drawn, snow swirling around them like angry ghosts. But they moved with the confidence of men who expected no real resistance. Evening, Dr. Vasquez, said the taller one, tipping his hat mockingly. Judge Blackwood sends his regards. Says it's time to collect his property. Elena raised the scalpel, its blade catching the firelight. My clinic, my rules, and these women aren't property. The man's smile showed too many teeth. That's where you're wrong, Doc. Everything in this territory belongs to somebody. Question is who's going to pay the price when the collecting starts. Outside, the storm howled like something hungry. Inside, 4 women faced down armed men in a clinic that suddenly felt less like sanctuary and more like a trap that had been years in the making. Singing Bird's rifle shot shattered the tall man's kneecap before he could blink. He dropped screaming, his gun skittering across the adobe floor. The second man spun toward her, but Dolores was already moving, her knife flashing in the firelight. Steel met flesh with a wet sound that made Mary Catherine retch. Amateurs, Dolores panted, wiping blood from her blade. Blackwood's getting sloppy. Elena kicked the fallen guns toward the corner, her hands already moving to check the wounded man's leg. Habit. Even enemies deserve proper medical care. The bullet had shattered bone but missed the major artery. He'd live if infection didn't set in. Why are you helping him? Elena asked, pressing cloth against the wound. The man's face was gray with pain and snow. Ain't helping nobody, just following orders. Whose orders? Judge said. Said you were expecting us. Said you had arrangements. Elena's stomach dropped. She looked up at the 3 women, all watching her with new suspicion. I never made arrangements with anyone. Then how'd he know we'd all be here? Mary Catherine demanded. How'd those men know exactly where to find us? Singing Bird moved to the broken window rifle, still ready. More riders coming, maybe 6, moving slow through the storm. Elena abandoned the wounded man and went to her medical cabinet. Behind the laudanum bottles, her fingers found what she was looking for, a hidden compartment she'd built years ago. Inside lay a small leather notebook filled with her own handwriting. Birth records dating back 5 years. Detailed notes about difficult deliveries, unmarried mothers, babies who died suspiciously young. Jesus, she whispered, flipping through pages she'd never written. This isn't my writing. Dolores snatched the notebook, scanning the entries. Listen to this. Mary Catherine O'Brien, due February 1874. Father unknown, referred to Territorial Placement Office. And here, Singing Bird Navajo, due January 1874. Child product of rape. Recommend immediate removal. Keep reading, Elena said grimly. Dolores Mondragon, premature birth, expected mother unsuitable for child-rearing, transfer arranged. Dolores's voice turned deadly quiet. Someone's been planning this for months. Elena felt pieces clicking into place like broken bones setting. Blackwood's been forging my records, making it look like I've been sending him problem cases for years. But why bring us all here at once? Mary Catherine asked. Singing Bird answered from the window. Because we're not the only ones. There's a wagon coming behind the riders, covered, big enough for... She stopped. For what? Elena demanded. For a lot of babies. The wind died suddenly, leaving in silence that felt more dangerous than the storm. Elena could hear voices outside, men calling to each other, organizing. Professional voices, military precision. We need weapons, she said. Real ones. Dolores hefted her knife. I told you. I killed 3 of his men already. With that, Elena eyed the small blade. Against 6 armed riders. Sometimes size doesn't matter. It's about knowing where to cut. Dolores's smile was sharp as her knife. My father taught me to butcher cattle before he sold me. Men aren't much different. Elena pulled down her medical bag and began sorting instruments. Scalpels, bone saws, forceps. Tools designed to heal, but steel was steel. What other skills do we have? I can track and hunt, Singing Bird said. My people taught me to read signs, set snares. And I can read, Mary Catherine added quietly. Elena looked at her. That's it. I can read anything. Numbers, ledgers, legal papers. Before Gallagher, I kept books for 3 different businesses. Mary Catherine's voice grew stronger. I saw his financial records when he was arranging my marriage. Blackwood's not just buying babies. He's selling them to specific clients. Rich families back east who will pay premium for healthy infants with no questions asked. Elena handed out scalpels, keeping the bone saw for herself. Then we know what we're fighting. Not just kidnappers. A business. Dolores tested the weight of a surgical blade. Good. Businesses have weaknesses. Money records people who can be bought or threatened. First we survive the night, Singing Bird said. Then we can think about fighting back. The sound of boots on the clinic's roof made them all freeze. Someone was climbing up to the chimney. Elena looked at the fire, then at her patients. If they blocked the chimney, the smoke would fill the clinic in minutes. Pregnant women couldn't survive that. The stove does, she ordered. Bank the fire now. As Mary Catherine smothered the flames with sand, Elena moved to her supply cabinet. Behind the bottles of carbolic acid and chloroform, she found what she needed: pure grain alcohol, the kind she used for sterilizing instruments. She began soaking strips of cloth, wrapping them around the scalpel handles. What are you doing? Dolores asked. Making torches. If they want to smoke us out, we'll give them fire. A voice called from outside, closer now. Dr. Vasquez, this is Captain Hayes' Territorial Enforcement. We have a legal warrant for the removal of 3 fugitives currently in your custody. Elena moved to the door but didn't open it. What warrant? What court? Judge Blackwood's court. The women are carrying stolen property of the territorial government. Since when are unborn babies government property? Since the Territorial Orphan Management Act of 1873. Any child born to an unmarried woman, any child of mixed blood, any child whose parents cannot provide proper support, all become wards of the territory upon birth. Elena felt her world tilt. There's no such act. Check your law books, doctor. It's been on record for 6 months. Singing Bird caught Elena's eye and shook her head slightly. She'd moved to the side window during the conversation, and now she held up 3 fingers, pointed to the back of the clinic, then made a slashing motion across her throat. Elena understood. 3 men circling behind. Singing Bird could handle them quietly if she moved now. Captain Hayes, Elena called. I need to see the warrant before I can comply with any territorial order. Of course, doctor. I'll slide it under the door. Elena watched a folded paper appear beneath the door. She picked it up, unfolded it, and read quickly. Official seals, legal language, Judge Blackwood's signature. It looked legitimate. But Mary Catherine was reading over her shoulder, and her face had gone white. Elena, she whispered, look at the date. Elena looked. The warrant was dated tomorrow. Forge, Dolores breathed. Sloppy one too. Elena moved to the window and called out, Captain Hayes, this warrant is dated in the future. February 15th, 1874. Today is February 14th. Silence from outside. Then the sound of multiple guns being cocked. Doesn't matter what date it is, doctor. Those women are coming with us. Dead or alive. Elena looked at her unlikely allies. Mary Catherine, pale but determined, clutching a scalpel like a prayer. Dolores' blood still on her hands, eyes bright with dangerous fury. And through the window she could see Singing Bird moving like a shadow toward the men behind the clinic. Ladies, Elena said quietly, I think it's time to show these gentlemen what happens when you corner a midwife and her patients. She struck a match and lit the alcohol-soaked cloth around her bone saw. The flame caught, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm was building again, but inside the clinic, something else was building too. Something that would make Judge Blackwood very sorry he'd ever heard the name Elena Vasquez. The scream from behind the clinic cut through the wind like a blade. High, short, then nothing. Singing Bird had found her first target. Elena pressed herself against the front wall bone saw, burning in her hand. Through the gap in the shutters, she counted muzzle flashes. 4 men spread across her yard in a loose semicircle. Military formation. These weren't bounty hunters or local sheriff's men. Captain Hayes, she called, you're down 1 soldier. We've got plenty more, doctor, and you've got nowhere to run. Mary Catherine crept to Elena's side scalpel ready. The back room. There's a root cellar, isn't there? I saw the trap door when you were getting bandages. Elena nodded. Connects to an old mine shaft. My husband dug it during the Apache troubles. Can we get out that way? Maybe, but we'd have to leave the wounded man. They both looked at the groaning figure by the fireplace. Dolores had tied his hands and stuffed cloth in his mouth, but he was conscious, watching everything with fever-bright eyes. "He'll tell them about the tunnel," Mary Catherine whispered. Elena gripped the bone saw tighter. The Hippocratic oath said, "Do no harm." But did that apply to men who bought and sold babies like livestock? A crash from the side window made the decision for her. Captain Hayes had thrown a burning branch through the glass. Fire caught the curtains, immediately spreading to the wooden shelves. "Move!" Elena shouted. Dolores was already pulling up the trapdoor, revealing a ladder that disappeared into darkness. "Ladies first," she said with grim humor. Mary Catherine went down slowly, her pregnant belly making the ladder awkward. Dolores followed, nimble as a cat despite her condition. Elena looked back at the wounded man, at her burning clinic, at everything she'd built over 5 years of trying to forget the war. Another burning branch came through the front window. The roof was catching now. Elena dropped through the trapdoor just as the ceiling began to collapse. The tunnel was narrow, dug through red clay, and shored up with timber that creaked ominously. Elena led the way by feel, one hand on the wall, the other still clutching her makeshift torch. Behind her, she could hear Mary Catherine's labored breathing and Dolores's whispered curses in Spanish. "How far?" Mary Catherine gasped. 50 yards to the mine entrance. From there, it's a mile through the hills to the old trading post. And if the trading post's been watching for us, Asuncionana." Elena didn't answer. They'd worry about that when they got there. The tunnel ended at a wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Elena pressed her ear against it, listening. No voices, no movement. She lifted the bar and pushed it open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of snow and pine. They emerged onto a hillside dotted with abandoned mine shafts, the kind of place where a woman could hide or disappear forever. Below them, Elena's clinic burned like a signal fire against the storm. Dolores pointed to a stand of trees halfway down the slope. "Someone's moving." Elena squinted through the snow. A figure in buffalo hide, moving with the fluid grace she recognized. Singing Bird. They made their way down the hill, slipping on loose shale and snow-covered rocks. Singing Bird met them at the tree line, her rifle slung across her back, blood on her hands and clothes. "3 down," she reported quietly. "2 clean kills, one who'll wish he was dead, but there are more coming." "How many more?" Elena asked. "I saw the wagon clearly when they lit your clinic. 20 men, maybe more. And something else." Singing Bird's face was grim. "Children. I heard crying from inside the wagon." Elena's blood turned to ice. "What kind of children?" "Young ones. Babies, maybe some toddlers. All quiet except for the crying." Dolores made a sound like a wounded animal. "He's moving his whole operation tonight, using the storm as cover." "Why now?" Mary Catherine asked. "Why all at once?" Elena thought about the forged records, the coordinated attacks, the military precision of Hayes's men. "Because someone's getting close to exposing him. He's cleaning house, moving the evidence." "Or eliminating it," Singing Bird said quietly. They stood in the falling snow, 4 women with surgical steel and desperate courage facing down an army. Elena looked at her companions, Irish bookkeeper, Mexican cattle killer, Navajo tracker, all carrying life inside them while surrounded by men who dealt in death. "The trading post," she said finally. "If it's compromised, we'll know soon enough. If not, there might be help there." "What kind of help?" Dolores asked. "The kind that doesn't ask questions about dead territorial officers." They moved through the trees like ghosts, Singing Bird leading Elena, bringing up the rear. Behind them, the clinic fire cast orange light against the clouds, a beacon visible for miles. Ahead, somewhere in the darkness, lay either sanctuary or another trap. Elena touched the bone saw at her belt and thought about the Hippocratic oath. Do no harm, but sometimes she was learning the only way to heal was to cut away what was rotten, even if it meant cutting deep, even if it meant cutting down to the bone. The trading post appeared through the storm like something from a fever dream. Adobe walls covered wagons, horses stamping in the cold. Too many horses, too many wagons, and in the center of it all, a man Elena recognized from wanted posters in the territorial capital. Judge Blackwood himself had come to collect his property. "Change of plans," Elena whispered to her companions. "We're not running anymore." "What are we doing?" Mary Catherine asked. Elena watched the judge's men unloading crates from the wagons, heard the sound of babies crying, saw the way they handled the boxes like freight rather than human cargo. "We're going to war." Judge Blackwood stood in the trading post's main room like a spider in the center of his web. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a year. He supervised the sorting of his human cargo with the same attention he might give to evaluating livestock. Elena crouched behind the water trough, watching through gaps in the wooden slats. 20 yards away, armed men moved crates containing children into the largest building. She counted at least 8 babies, some toddlers who stumbled when they walked. All quiet. Drugged, probably. Singing Bird touched her shoulder and pointed toward the stable. 6 horses there. We could take them ride hard toward the territorial capital. And leave the children. Elena shook her head. I've spent 5 years running from the babies I couldn't save. Not doing it again. Dolores crept closer, knife ready. So what's the plan? 4 of us against 20 of them? Not 20, Elena corrected. 4 of us against 1 of him. Take out Blackwood, the rest scatter like roaches? Mary Catherine's face was pale in the moonlight. You want to assassinate a territorial judge? I want to stop a man who's been murdering babies for profit. Elena checked her makeshift weapons. There's a difference. A commotion near the main building caught their attention. 2 men were dragging a struggling figure from one of the wagons, a woman young, screaming in Spanish until someone hit her hard enough to silence her. Maria Santos. Dolores whispered, her voice tight with rage. I know her. We were in the same facility before I escaped. Elena watched the pregnant woman being hauled toward the building where Blackwood waited. How far along is she? Full term, maybe overdue. Elena's medical instincts kicked in. A woman that pregnant under this kind of stress in this cold labor could start at any moment. And Blackwood's men didn't look like they cared whether mother or child survived the process. New plan, she said grimly. We go in now. That's not a plan, Mary Catherine protested. That's suicide. Maybe, but I took an oath to preserve life, all life, not just the convenient ones. Elena rose from behind the trough, bone saw gleaming in the firelight from the trading post windows. Singing Bird, can you get to the roof? Give us covering fire. Already moving. Singing Bird replied, melting into the shadows with her rifle. Dolores, you know the layout of these places. Back entrance, sauna, kitchen door, usually unlocked for deliveries. Mary Catherine, you stay here with the horses. If this goes bad, I'm coming with you. Elena looked at the Irish girl's determined face at the scalpel clutched in her white-knuckled fist. You're 8 months pregnant. So is she, Mary Catherine nodded toward the building where Maria had been taken. And I can read legal documents fast. If Blackwood has records of his operation, we need them. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Not fear, something harder, cleaner. The feeling she'd had during the war when everything came down to simple choices, save life or lose it. Then let's go save some babies. They moved across the yard in a crouch, using the wagons for cover. From somewhere overhead, Elena heard the soft scrape of Singing Bird finding her position. The kitchen door was exactly where Dolores had said it would be, unlocked, unguarded, opening onto a narrow hallway that smelled of grease and unwashed bodies. Voices carried from the main room. Blackwood's cultured tones giving orders about shipping schedules and payment arrangements. Underneath it, the sound that made Elena's teeth clench: babies, crying young children whimpering in fear. The crying room, Dolores whispered, pointing down the hall. That's where they keep them before processing. Elena didn't ask what processing meant. She could guess. They crept toward the voices, Elena's medical bag bouncing softly against her hip. Through a crack in the door, she could see into the main room. Blackwood stood over a table covered with papers, while Maria Santos lay on a makeshift examining table nearby. Her labor had started. Elena could see the contractions racking her body. Hurry it along, doctor, Blackwood was saying to a thin man with shaking hands. The Eastern buyers don't like their merchandise damaged by difficult births. Elena's vision went red. She'd seen army doctors work on wounded soldiers with more compassion than this butcher was showing a woman in labor. Mary Catherine grabbed her arm. Elena, wait. Look at the papers on his table. Elena forced herself to focus. Shipping manifests, payment receipts, and a leather-bound ledger that looked exactly like the forged records from her clinic. Birth certificates, Mary Catherine breathed. He's been forging official territorial documents, creating legal identities for stolen children. Can you prove it? Give me 5 minutes with that ledger, and I can prove enough to hang him. A scream from Maria made them both flinch. The labor was progressing fast, too fast for safety without proper medical care. Elena made her decision. You get the ledger, I get the patient. Elena, you can't deliver a baby in the middle of a gunfight. Watch me. Elena kicked open the door and strode into the room, bone saw, raised medical authority radiating from every step. The fake doctor looked up, startled. Blackwood turned his face, shifting from surprise to cold calculation. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," he said smoothly. "How convenient. I was hoping you'd join us tonight." "Let me guess," Elena replied, moving toward Maria. "You've been planning this for months. Years, actually. Ever since you so rudely rejected my business proposition." Blackwood gestured to his men, who raised their weapons. "Did you really think you could hide in that little clinic forever, pretending you weren't responsible for all those dead babies?" Elena's hands never stopped moving, checking Maria's pulse, assessing her labor progress. "I never killed any babies." "No. What about Miguel and Carlos Vasquez? Your own sons?" Blackwood's smile was sharp as a scalpel. "They died because you chose to save strangers, instead of rushing home to save your own children." Elena felt the old guilt rise, then pushed it down. "They died because you poisoned the water supply in Santa Fe. I have the medical reports." Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. "Prove it." "Already did." Mary Catherine emerged from behind the table, the leather ledger in her hands. "Your handwriting is distinctive, Judge, especially when you're forging territorial documents. And your shipping records are very detailed." Elena added, never taking her hands off Maria. 23 babies sold to Eastern families in the past year alone. Average price $500 each. "That's a federal crime," a new voice said from the doorway. Elena looked up to see Singing Bird holding her rifle on two of Blackwood's men. Behind her, a figure in a snow-covered coat stepped into the room, a man wearing a federal marshal's badge. "Marshal Williams' Denver office," he announced. "We've been tracking your operation for 6 months, Judge Blackwood." Blackwood's face went white. "You have no jurisdiction here." "I do, when you're trafficking children across territorial lines." The marshal gestured to his men, who appeared from the hallway. "And when you're murdering federal witnesses." Elena felt Maria's contraction intensify. The baby was coming now, ready or not. "I need clean water and light," she ordered. "And someone get these guns away from my patient." "Elena," Mary Catherine whispered urgently. "The ledger. There's something else. Names, dates. He's been doing this for over a decade." Elena looked down at Maria, at the new life fighting to be born in the middle of all this death and corruption. Then she looked at Blackwood, standing surrounded by federal marshals, his empire of stolen children crumbling around him. "How many?" she asked quietly. "According to this, over 200 children, maybe more." Elena felt something break inside her chest. 200 children, 200 families destroyed, 200 lives stolen and sold like cattle. Maria screamed again, her body arching with the final push of labor. Elena caught the baby as it slipped into the world, a perfect, healthy girl with her mother's dark hair and strong lungs. As the baby's first cry filled the room, Elena looked up at Judge Blackwood. "This is how it ends," she said. "Not with death, with life." But Blackwood wasn't looking at the baby. He was looking at the gun in his hand, the one he'd pulled while everyone's attention was on the birth. "This is how it ends," he agreed, raising the weapon toward Elena and the newborn. Singing Bird's rifle shot took off his right hand before he could fire. Dawn broke gray and cold over the New Mexico territory, but inside the trading post, warmth had returned. Maria Santos held her daughter close, while Elena cleaned and counted instruments she'd never thought to use as weapons. 23 babies and children had been recovered from Blackwood's wagons, the youngest barely 3 days old. The oldest a boy of 5 who'd been stolen from his Apache family 2 years ago. Marshal Williams sat at the table where Blackwood had once sorted his human cargo, now organizing evidence for what promised to be the territorial trial of the decade. Mary Catherine worked beside him, her bookkeeper's mind unraveling years of forged documents and illegal transactions. "This goes all the way to the territorial capital," she reported, pointing to entries in the ledger. Blackwood had judges, sheriffs, even army officers on his payroll. "How many children total?" Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Records show 247 sales over 12 years. Mary Catherine's voice was quiet with the weight of it. "But there are gaps, missing months, incomplete records. Could be more." Elena looked around the room at the recovered children. Most were too young to understand what had happened to them, but the older ones watched everything with eyes that had seen too much. The 5-year-old Apache boy hadn't spoken yet, just stared at Singing Bird like he was afraid she might disappear if he looked away. "What happens to them now?" Dolores asked. She sat near the fire, helping one of the toddlers eat warm broth with careful patience. "The babies go to the territorial orphanage in Santa Fe," Marshal Williams said. "The older ones will try to find their families." And if you can't eat them, Williams didn't answer immediately. Elena understood why. In 1874, a native child with no tribe, a Mexican baby with no papers, an Irish infant with no family, their prospects weren't bright even in legitimate care. There might be another option, Elena said slowly. An idea was forming dangerous and probably illegal, but right in a way that territorial law had never been. Such as, Williams asked. Elena looked at her three companions, singing bird checking rifles with professional competence. Dolores mothering children who weren't hers with fierce protectiveness. Mary Catherine reading legal documents like battle plans. What if they didn't go to Santa Fe? What if they stayed here with people who understand what it means to be unwanted? Williams frowned. The trading post is no place for children. Not the trading post. My land. Elena gestured toward the hills where her clinic had burned. I own 160 acres under the Homestead Act. Rich soil, good water, enough space for a real ranch. You're talking about adoption, Williams said. Multiple adoptions. The territorial government would never approve. The territorial government just arrested one of its own judges for child trafficking. Mary Catherine interrupted. I think they'll approve whatever keeps this scandal quiet. Singing Bird joined the conversation. My people, what's left of them, they won't take me back, but they might accept children who need homes. And Mexican families in Las Cruces, Dolores added. They'd welcome babies, especially if it means keeping them away from men like Blackwood. Elena felt the pieces clicking together like bones setting properly after a break. Not just adoption, a network. Families who want children, people who understand lost communities that protect their own. An underground railroad, Mary Catherine said softly, but for children instead of slaves. Williams studied them all with the careful attention of a man who'd spent years chasing criminals, only to discover the real crime was in the law itself. You're talking about operating outside territorial authority. We're talking about saving lives, Elena corrected. Isn't that what the law is supposed to do? A soft cry from one of the babies drew Elena's attention. She moved to the makeshift nursery they'd set up near the fire, checking each infant automatically. Healthy. All of them healthy despite what they'd endured. Dr. Vasquez, Williams said finally. Officially, I can't sanction what you're proposing. Elena looked up from the baby she was holding. And unofficially, Blackwood had contacts throughout the territory. It'll take months to root them all out. Until then, these children aren't safe in any official facility. Huh. So what are you saying? Williams picked up the leather ledger and walked toward the fire. I'm saying my report will show that most of the stolen children died in the storm. Tragic loss. No bodies recovered due to the harsh winter conditions. Elena understood. And the survivors? What survivors? Williams tossed the ledger into the flames. According to my official investigation, 4 heroic women died trying to rescue children from a burning building. Very sad. No remains found. Mary Catherine smiled grimly. Dead women don't answer questions. Exactly. Williams turned to Elena. Think you can manage being legally dead, Dr. Vasquez? Elena looked around the room again. At the children who needed homes? At the women who'd found each other in the storm? At the fire consuming years of Blackwood's records? I've been dead for 5 years, she said quietly. Might as well make it official. 6 months later, travelers on the road between Santa Fe and Las Cruces sometimes spoke of a strange ranch in the foothills, a place where women worked the land alongside Mexican vaqueros and Apache scouts, where children of all colors played together in the yard while their mothers, some young, some older, all with eyes that had seen hard things, taught them to read and ride and shoot. The ranch had no official name, but locals called it Elena's Place, after the midwife who'd established it. Some said she'd been a war hero. Others claimed she'd died in a fire, but somehow kept working anyway. Most agreed she delivered the healthiest babies in 3 territories and never asked questions about the mothers who came to her door. Elena Vasquez herself rarely spoke of the past. She was too busy with the present, a house full of children who'd found families, women who'd found purpose, and a network that stretched from Texas to Colorado, quietly moving children from danger to safety, one small life at a time. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, she would sometimes walk to the hill where her original clinic had burned. A new building stood there, now larger and better equipped, but she preferred the view from the old spot. From there, she could see the whole valley spread below the ranch, the families, the new life growing in what had once been empty desert. Mary Catherine often joined her there, usually carrying reports from their growing network. The Irish girl had turned out to have a gift for organization that rivaled any general Elena had known during the war. 15 more placements this month. Mary Catherine might say, settling beside Elena on the wooden bench someone had built there. The family in Tucson took twins, and the widow in Denver wants a toddler. Elena would nod, watching smoke rise from the chimneys below. Any problems? A few questions from territorial officials, but Marshall Williams is handling them. Officially, we're just a working ranch that happens to take in orphans. And unofficially, Mary Catherine would smile, then the expression transforming her face from the pale, frightened girl Elena had first met. Unofficially, we're making it very expensive for men like Blackwood to stay in business. On this particular evening, Dolores climbed the hill to join them, her own baby born healthy in the spring, riding on her hip. Behind her came Singing Bird leading a small procession of children home from the creek where they'd been fishing. Any word from the marshal? Elena asked. 3 more arrests in Colorado territory, Dolores reported, and a federal law pending that would make child trafficking a hanging offense. Elena nodded, watching the children scatter to their various families for supper. Apache boys raised by Mexican mothers, Irish girls taught to track by Navajo women, mixed-blood babies who would grow up thinking all families look like rainbows. You know what I realize, Mary Catherine said suddenly. Elena looked at her. What? We never did figure out why we all ended up at your clinic that night. The storm, the timing, it seemed too convenient to be accident. Elena was quiet for a long moment, thinking about providence and chance, and the way broken things sometimes fit together better than whole ones ever had. Maybe it wasn't an accident, she said finally. Maybe some things are just meant to be. Below them, the ranch bustled with the controlled chaos of large families everywhere. Children calling for their mothers, mothers calling for their children. Singing Bird's voice raised in an old Navajo lullaby that had become popular with all the babies regardless of their blood. Elena touched the scar on her palm where she'd cut herself on the broken window that first night, the night she'd learned that sometimes the only way to heal was to let yourself bleed a little first. Think it'll last? Mary Catherine asked. What we've built here, Elena considered the question seriously. They lived outside the law, survived on good intentions and stubborn will. Any day, territorial officials could arrive with legitimate orders to shut them down. But then she looked at the children below, healthy and laughing and safe. At the women who'd found strength they never knew they had. At the network spreading quietly across the Southwest, one rescued child at a time. It'll last, she said with certainty, because some things are too important to die. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of hope and fire, Elena Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. She'd set out to save 3 pregnant women from a storm and ended up saving herself instead. Sometimes she thought the best healing was the kind you never saw coming.